I'm Rashid Khaldi. I'm one of the co-directors of the Center for Palestine Studies, and it's my pleasure to be presenting a quite wonderful book entitled "The Land That Remains" by Federico Bolsonaro, it's a work of love.
Thank you.
It's a work, I think, of art, and it's also a work of, I don't know if you would call it recovery of things that are disappearing, or an attempt to preserve what is disappearing. But it is, I think, really quite an important effort on the part of Federico. Let me say a couple of things about our two. Well, I should also introduce. This is Federico Bolsonaro to my right, Giovanni Antonelli to my left. Giovanni was involved in various ways in the production of the book, and both of them will be talking about it. So I will leave it to them to explain to you how each of them came to be involved, what the genesis of the project was, and so on. I want to say just a couple words about the book, which they describe as an exploration of a culture and a civilization that is vanishing into the landscape. So it's both set against the quite beautiful landscape of Palestine, but it's also an attempt to chart what they describe, and what I think correctly can be described as a culture and a people and a society that's under threat. It's based on wonderful images, which you're going to show us a number of. We will pass around a copy of the book so that you can look at them more carefully. They're really quite extraordinary images. There are actually two copies. You can pass one out around on each side. But I think you will notice when you look at this book that it includes a number of the iconic images that every single one of us who has ever seen a photograph of Palestine will recognize. A picture of Al-Aqsa, or of the Haram al-Sharif, or of the Mount of Olives, a picture of the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. Iconic images. But that's not what this book is mainly about. What you should also be looking at is the landscape, the countryside. And this is one of the things that the book is trying to show us, I think. So it is they describe it as an attempt, or I should say, really, Federico describes it as an attempt to shed light on the impending loss of Palestine's cultural legacy. And I will leave that to him. Let me say a few words about our two presenters today. Federico is actually Dr. Bolsonaro. He is a medical physician trained as a doctor with a diploma in medicine and surgery from the University of Pisa. He is not here, however, to talk about psoriasis or broken legs. He began a career as a photographer several years after he obtained his degree in medicine, and he has since published a number of books, which I won't talk about, going back to 2001. Quite remarkable photographic essays of different sorts. And rather than talk about his work, I'm going to let him show you some of his work, and I think that will tell you more than I can tell you. Giovanni, just very briefly, let me say one more thing about Federico. Federico has had exhibitions all over the world, in Palestine, in Italy, in France, in Germany, and a number of exhibitions in the United States. He has a number of portfolios that have been permanently exhibited, and he's actually published 3 different books of his photographs. Giovanni, to my left, is an architect and regional planner. His training was in Italy. He works mainly in conservation, and that's how I got to know him. Joined UNESCO in 1998, and served as the head of culture at the UNESCO office in Ramallah. So he lived in Palestine from 2003 to 2013, and it's in that capacity he became the facilitator of this wonderful project, where his effort was to protect Palestinian cultural identity and the livelihood of local communities. This involved museum development, involved preservation, it involved capacity building, And it is one of the sides of the work of the United Nations that we very rarely see. We mainly see the political. But the kind of work that Giovanni was doing in Palestine was extraordinarily important. Among other things, he worked in the village of Bakhtia, where he worked on this extraordinary system of dry stone terraces and canals, helping to preserve them and helping them to achieve the Melina Mercuri International Prize for the Safeguarding of Cultural Landscapes in 2011, and was instrumental in the inscription of the cultural landscape of southern Jerusalem / Bakhtia on the World Heritage List in 2014. So he's not just somebody who's studied or served as an official of the United Nations. He's also someone who's helped to actually protect important cultural sites at a time when such sites are very obviously being destroyed in an overt and barbaric fashion, as has happened in Palmyra and other places in Syria, or are being ground up by much more subtle, much less visible processes, whether expansion of cities or whether colonization, as in the case of the occupied territories, where only a very small percentage of the land of the West Bank is under Palestinian control, and in the other areas there's no protection whatsoever for cultural heritage. He's served, I can list where he's served, but I think the most important thing I've just said, which is that he spent a little over 10 years in Palestine working for UNESCO and doing the work that I mentioned. So we have a very gifted photographer who has clearly connected, as you'll see I think from these photographs, with the land and the culture and the people of Palestine. You have a preservationist and an architect who has connected in a different way. And both have done, I hope you'll feel as I do, remarkable things there. So I won't say any more. I'm going to move over so Giovanni can take this slot. And so that they can play with the computer and show you beautiful images. So join me in welcoming our two guests.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. Since the room also is very cozy in a way, it's not really a large conference hall, so I think we can really set up this conversation really as a dialogue, as a open dialogue and conversation between us. So there's a first module of dialogue between the two of us. So we have decided to organize this presentation as a dialogical presentation. But of course it is open, so you can actually interrupt us anytime you desire, or we will give you the floor to you for inputs or questions or any other comments you may have. I thank, of course, Professor Rashid Khalidi, who introduced us very generously, too much actually. I think I will give the floor now to Federico, who will start introducing the first image that talks a bit about how the book started, how this project has started, which actually started as a photographic campaign first, and then the idea of the book came later on. In between the campaign and the book, there was a photographic exhibition that took place in Paris at UNESCO headquarters in 2010, February 2010. So it's a few years ago actually already. And a few years we actually invested in designing, preparing, and also funding the book to be published. This is an image of the Haram al-Sharif, that is the Ashrafia Library, which is one of the buildings surrounding the Haram. It is, until now, it's currently ongoing UNESCO project for the preservation of Quranic manuscripts. Talk about more than 1,000 manuscripts being preserved and restored there by an equipe of Palestinians trained by an international team. And this is a photo which is one of my favorite photos of the book, actually, to be frank with you, because first of all, the light is simply amazing. This room is very dark if you go in person. And there is a tomb as you see in the middle of this space, and is not blocking the preservation of manuscripts and the storage of these manuscripts that are put in plastic, in nylon bags after being cleaned and sterilized. And it is one of the pictures that I think symbolizes the work UNESCO is doing in the Palestinian territory, occupied Palestinian territory, and also symbolizes the relation between the two of us when Federico was called by me to photograph, to make a photography of this land. It is not a typical UNESCO project, I have to say that. It is not a typical UNESCO project. If there's any photography between among us here, and you will address any UNESCO office in the world or the UNESCO headquarters in Paris with the brilliant idea proposing a photographic research or anything like this, UNESCO probably will decline the offer by saying that there's no funding and there's not really the most urgent or priority activity they have to undertake. Therefore, they will decline. In our case, the genesis of the project started with a different, let's say, from a different angle. It was 2008, second half of 2008, which means it was exactly in the middle of my decade at Ramallah office. And 5 years before our talk, and 5 years to go for me to finish, not to finish, but to accomplish certain projects that were ongoing. And you have to understand that one of the most pervasive feelings that a project officer has experiences in working in Palestine is frustration. It's frustration. I have to say that because the status quo, which is now is a 70 years old status quo, Rashid, I think you know very well, a bit less than 70, but it is massive. It is something that the individual, the group, or even the organization or large organizations confront in a very difficult manner. It's not an easy task to confront with. So in my much smaller, but it's not that small shorter period of 10 years in Palestine, I felt this frustration, and after 5 years, I felt the urgency really to change a bit the pace of my action. So I was not anymore happy to mainstream projects, or to follow a stream of projects, which in many cases, we know it very well, they are associated or close to normalization in that type of setting. And therefore, I decided to detach a bit from the normal or the standardized UN modus operandi or activities, and I decided to work on a different wave, like a frequency in the radio. I changed the frequency. I tuned on another frequency, and this work started at that time. But it is important to say that when this work started, the type of work that I started to produce changed, and Federico had the opportunity, it was just in a way a coincidence, although I do not believe in coincidences, but it was an opportunity to witness and cooperate with me on this type of, let's say, new approach, or from my point of view was a new approach. This is why some of the projects you're seeing here, you will be portrayed in these photographs are of a bit more, let's say, political nature than that the neutrality of the UN normally doesn't support. But there was a time where the politically correctness at one point should leave the floor to engagement, to more engaged action. This is my introduction. I hope it was clear enough, because there are many different concepts here and there going through. And I give the floor to Federico, who will probably jump into this photograph from his point of view, and will give you other inputs from his experience. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me clearer. I'm sorry for my Italian accent, but if you don't understand, please let me know. I will repeat. First of all, I want to say thank you to Rashid Khalid to be your guest here. It's been a great honor to be at the Columbia University after 6 years that these photographs were made. And I want to say also thank you to the audience for coming here today to listen to what I'm going to say about these photographs. Now, it's not going to be easy to describe the photographic 79 photograph sequence of the book. And it's not easy because, first of all, there is a distance, let's say distance, between the visual content of a photograph and its appellation. An image is an image. The word comes after. An image is born naked. Then we put the image in a context, which is not anymore the context of the photographer, but also becomes public, like today, and when the book was published in April by the German publisher Attekans. The second reason that is not easy is because as I talk about this work 6 years later, I face the same challenges, the same questions which I discussed with Giovanni in 2008, December 2008, when he called me to photograph the cultural landscape and heritage of occupied Palestine. What does it mean for a photographer to photograph a cultural landscape? That was my question. For me, it's not important or so important how to take an image. The fundamental question is why you are taking an image. Because a photograph is an ethical choice. In the moment I take a photograph, I have to include in the frame one part and to exclude something else. So is for me the greatest responsibility I can take towards the subject, towards the assignment that in that case was given by UNESCO, and towards myself. Now, Giovanni asked me not only to visualize a list of archaeological sites, relics, monuments, reliquaries, towns, and natural place, which is the heritage of a place, in this case, Palestine. He was asking me something more complex, something which I call more immaterial. In other words, to convey a certain mood of the place. If I can use the word of a psychiatrist, a psychanalyst, Hillman calls this the soul of a place, the soul of the place. Now, is it possible today to photograph Palestine? Is it possible to photograph a reality which has been changed by the reality of somebody else? That was the other question which I had to ask myself. The landscape of Palestine is not neutral, of course. Therefore, my images could not be neutral, even if I don't see this work as political. For me, it's a work about time, the time of a Palestine, the time of the past in the present, and the time of the present in the past. When I started, I found myself entering a quite a dangerous context where land, space, time, history, memory, past, present, identity, justice, photography, Palestine, they were all connected because each other is the mirror of the other. So the very name of Palestine evokes all these words. And as soon as I started to enter the land, I was completely overwhelmed by the power, the weight, the beauty, the pain of the land. This is the land where all the suffering began and has never ended. We know that. During my 3 journeys in Palestine, the first journey was from December 2008 until March 2009. Then I spent 1 month during the summer of 2009, and then I did another 3 months. Thank you to Giovanni that gave me a kind of carte blanche. He said, Federico, go as you like. That's the list of places, but then try to encompass as much as you can of the land.
Carte blanche and 1 car.
And 1 car.
And my car.
Was your car. So, in retrospect, I perceive the land, which is the subject of the research, as time. I felt in Palestine an excess of time. What does mean this? What is time? Time is an idea, is a concept, but is also everything that we are made of. I've been strongly influenced by the movies of Tarkovsky. And I think that the use, when he uses the word time image, is perfectly right. An image is a time. And when I start to visit Palestine, especially this image which I'm going to comment now, I had in my mind the photographs which my mother keeps in her bedroom. In her bedroom there is the portrait of her father, my grandfather, who is dressed as a soldier, a young soldier of the First World War. Then there is also the photograph of the mother of my mother. For my mother, these images are literally time image. They speak with her, and she speaks with them. For her, the private which they contain is an ongoing time, an ongoing moment. The past is the present for her, and the present lives in the past. When my mother dies, these photographs, these portraits, will survive her. but the private significance, the intimacy of these photographs, the music of these photographs will also be lost with her. So, to resist the passage of time, photographs must become part of the collective consciousness. This is exactly what I was trying to do in Palestine, to make photographs which could speak on behalf of the land and the time of the land. Photographs that would depart from the land, because I received these images from the land. At the same time, without leaving them. The morning that Giovanni told me to photograph the center of conservation of the manuscript of Al-Aqsa, I was literally staring at the tomb, the Mamluk tomb in the center, and the manuscripts, which are wrapped in plastic envelopes. For me, that is an image of a reliquary, a tomb and manuscripts, time. Before taking this photograph, I spent almost all day waiting for the light. And I was thinking, I was imagining the people who wrote and read those pages, and all the ancient places, the sanctuaries where these books might have been kept. Houses, palaces, mosques, schools, libraries of other times. That's why I see the image as time. I thought all the mornings that these books saw, and all the nights that they must have consoled, and all the dreams and hopes that these books contain. How wide and deep is the world in a room like this? Is a kind of a phantasmatic time image. Is a memory which has been rescued from history and from time. For a long while, I stood in front of this tomb, of these books, which are on the brink of a disappearing, of a vanishing. I was in a state of literally of a bewilderment. And I was waiting for the light to carry and fix them on my film. Jacques Derrida says, toute photographie est du soleil. Every photograph belongs to the sun, to the light. So images, like the images of my mother, are a gift that I receive in silence. I have an obligation as a photographer, is to render this image, like this one, as a photograph which is going to stay, to remain with us, to become a public, not only my photograph. That's my obligation. A photograph is not an isolated accident. Is the growth of a previous conditions and the search of a new possibilities. A photograph is about waiting, not so much waiting for circumstances which just pass by, but waiting as a condition of our human existence. To photograph means to cultivate time. And that's a contradiction of a photography, because in the act of taking this image, the tomb and the books around, which has been illuminated by a certain light in that instant and not another instant, the delay between the scene, what I've seen there, and what I perceived, and then the decision to translate this into a photograph, one time for a future time. In that moment, I became aware of all the time in which I was there, and also my own time. The power and the limit of a photography to fix the duration through the opposite, a fraction of seconds, the moment of the shutter. Hence my kind of a nostalgia, to go back to Tarkovsky. My desire to do away with the passage of time, to make an image which is going to stay for a future time. In fact, the beauty of a moment like this is a moment of infinite duration. Attention is the only meaning of the being. So a photograph is not for me an accident. My work in Palestine was not a reportage. It's not about the conflict, it's rather about the consequences of thousands of years of history on the land. I call this an elegy. I call also like a prayer. We pray for something to stay with us, to remain with us. And that's what I tried to do in my book, in the 79 photograph sequence, which show the memory in order to preserve this memory on a film, on a page. Is this clear? What I'm trying to say, to convey with you. The same kind of nostalgia of these manuscripts I perceive in the desert of Nami Musa, which we can show, Giovanni. No, go ahead. Try to find Nami Musa.
Non c'era nulla.
Non c'era?
Questo forse.
No, va bene, non importa.
It is close to my nose. It's what he felt.
And in Wadi Kelt, this is an image of Wadi Kelt, which Wadi Kelt is a wadi, a canyon, which stretches from Jerusalem to Jericho. Wadi Kelt has been inhabited for thousands of years. This is the kind of a photograph that people can think about the old Palestine. But there is another photograph of Wadi Kelt which brings me to the present. The red car in this band. That's also Wadi Kelt. So there is a contrast between the past and the present. The present, as I say, lives in the past and vice versa. In this image of a Wadi Kelt, you see an Israeli settlement on top of the hill and they wreck the car. The contrast between the two images is striking, yet it is the same place. To me, Al-Aram al-Sharif, the one before. You know Al-Aram al-Sharif. This photograph is, in a sense, the continuation of the photograph of the manuscripts, not only because geographically the room of the manuscripts is in front of this, in front of the Dome of the Rock. But if you look at the image, there are no people. I photographed this in the morning with heavy rain and gives you a sense of suspension of time. And that was my idea, as I say. to fix the duration of something which is in the present, is alive, is now, but also goes back to the time, another time. It is continuous relationship between the past and the present which is enduring the past, like the photographs of my mother that I was talking to you before. It is a kind of archaeology in the present. This Palestine landscape is not fossilized, it's alive. And for me, Palestine has been the quintessential time, space, history, memory, what we have forgotten, what has been forgotten, and is there. Bring me the photograph of the gypsy or the shepherds. Stop at the shepherds. This is another image which I will call time image. What you see there are shepherds. They seem that they belong to the landscape because there has been a tradition, not only in Palestine, but also in Italy, in France, of moving your flocks from one place to another one. When we presented this image at the UNESCO exhibition in 2010, I saw a woman crying in front of the image because she said to me, this is the Palestine which I have seen, the Palestine which is vanishing. And so my effort to fix the moment of the photograph, to fix the duration, which is almost a metaphysical, almost a psychological, I would say, because it brings me back into the memory. It's like taking away the memory from the moment and making this moment eternal. That's the effort of the photograph, the photographer, the trailer. The two images are together in the book. There is a kind of a stillness which in my images are very important. It is very important. Go with to the horse if you find the skunk. This is one of my images which touches me for various reasons. When I took this image, I was in a car. I stopped. There was not even the time to use the tripod because there was no time. I usually photograph with the tripod. As I say, I wait. But I was ready for this image. In a sense, the image was already inside me. I was ready to receive the image. A person asked me recently if I want to make an aesthetic statement with my images. I say, no, that's not my concern. Of course, because of the training, I've been photographing for 30 years. I know almost by instinct now how to compose an image. I use the square format because the square format brings me inside the center of the image. So it makes a composition particularly strong. But why am I so fond of this image? The horse is completely still. It's almost frozen. That's what I wanted to show. This continuity, this continuum of time through a moment. I know that at the end of this road there is an Israeli checkpoint. That's not the point of the photograph, we don't see that. The point is that is the solitude of this landscape. After making this image, I found a poem by Mahmoud Darwish that probably you know. The dialogue between the father and the son, when the son asked the father, why did you leave the horse alone? And the father says, we left the horse behind to keep company to the house that we had to leave. That could be the caption of this photo. By the way, in the book you see the captions are extremely factual. My intention was not to use any word at all, just to leave the images naked. But because we make a book, it was necessary to specify, at least to be a factual explanation of what it is. So in this case, the image is the road to Iskaka. Iskaka is the village where I found this photograph, or I received this photograph, which is different. This one. There are two images here from Bethlehem. The caption of the image is a peace center. Giovanni asked me that day to climb the roof of the Peace Center, which is a new building in front of the Church of the Nativity. The idea was to photograph Bethlehem, because at that time there was another project of UNESCO mapping Bethlehem. You remember very well that. But for me as a photographer, after taking several photographs of the Bethlehem, of the town, I received another image, which is this one. Somebody has dropped the statue of the Christ on the roof of the Peace Center. The caption simply says Peace Center. The rest is given to the imagination of the person that looks. The next. At the bottom of the Peace Center, the Christ is on the roof. At the bottom there are chained olive trees trunks. It's like a memento mori. Again, the memory rescued from history on public display. Of course, every photograph is a metaphor. It's not only fact, it's a metaphor of something else. The trees are the potent symbol of this land. When Giovanni asked me to photograph archaeological remains, I did a series of photographs just for the sake of the record. Here there is Tel al-Sultan, which is the foundation of Jericho, the old walls of Jericho. So I photographed the site, but there was one image which struck me, and it's this one. That's the present containing the past, the contemporary and the modernity. The cables take people from Jericho to the Mount of Temptation, where Jesus Christ, according to the tradition, was tempted. It's almost surreal, I would say, that we have something modern on top of something which is almost 10,000 years old. So this can be seen in different ways. Can be seen something strange, something useful. At the same time, it can be seen also like alive. The place is not just a relic. People still live there. and I want to move forward. Jericho, go ahead. That's another image I'm particularly fond. Is a soap factory in Nablus. Giovanni asked me to go. It is a soap factory and to photograph the entire process of how they make soap, which I did.
Although it's not in the book.
Huh?
Although it's not in the book.
Not in it. There is only one image in the book, which is this one. And the reason there is this image again is the mirror of the present, which is in the back, the sofa, the white part, and old, which is the factory itself. There is a dialogue between the two parts. This because the book is not a record of archaeological sites just fixed there. There is a dialogue between what is before and what is there, the past and the present. They may be in a reckless opposition because of the occupation, but there is a dialogue. They keep on, they move on. Rabba. And I want to say more.
Where is this?
This Rabba
South of Tubas.
is a
Northern
small
part of the West
village on the border of Area C of the Jordan Valley, not far from Jenin. Jenin is at east.
Yeah.
I was lucky. I had the great fortune to travel the entire West Bank. And I took a liberty to go sometimes in places which Giovanni even didn't know or not mention.
You've been there.
And I ended up in some places which were not even on the map. I was traveling with the United Nations map, and I couldn't move because I had the United Nations permit, so I could cross to the checkpoints without too many complications, I would say. So I ended up in this village in Rab. And again here what struck me is the solitude. There is a paradox, in a sense. Palestine is densely populated. But as I traveled around, I saw very few people. And one of the reasons is because they need the permits from the Israeli army to travel. There was also another choice. We decided with the curator of the book, Ansansio Zanza, not to include the images of people. And this is for two reasons. The first is because the subject is the land, the memory of the land. The land is the repository and the custodian of the time of Palestine. The second reason is because the Palestinians inhabit an absence. The land has been taken away. However, there are two images at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book. Go ahead. That's the opening images of the book. It's a man I met along Route 60. Route 60 is the main road which crosses the entire West Bank. I was going to Sanur because Giovanni told me go there to photograph some historical sites, monuments there. And I met this man. We decided to open the book with this photograph, with this image. Why? In time, as I grow and then my photographs grow with me, I found one thing. A photograph does not show one thing itself. What it shows or try to communicate is relationships on a different level. And that's images is almost a demonstration of this. There is a man sitting, waiting for probably a lift of somebody. But the punctum, to use the word of Roland Barthes, is not only the posture of the man waiting, is the clock. I spent 15 minutes with him. I don't speak Arabic. The man spoke just a very few words of English. He agreed to be taken to be photographed. There is only one photograph. I'm not taking any other photograph of him. During those 50 minutes around, the clock did not move. So the clock was stopped. So for me, this photograph represented the condition of the Palestinian people. They are waiting. They're asking us a solution which can come only from the outside. The time has stopped. Ironically, that clock, I found it is a letter, is kept in a bag of a company that is written H&O, which sells clothes. It's an Israeli company which sells garments on internet, online. So the clock is inside the bag, which probably the man has found somewhere, because I don't think he has a computer or can go online and to buy clothes from the Israelis. But it's the relationship between the clock and the bag and the possession of the man who is completely still there. And there is another image, the one which closes the book. This image is of a lady. I know the name of the lady, but for a matter of privacy, it's not been published in the book. The caption tells the name of the village where I met Al-Numan. Al-Numan is a small village which has been cut off from the wall, the checkpoint, and a large Israeli settlement called Aroma. That's Aroma. Look at the photograph of the woman. Look at the way she looks. Her eyes are downcast. I received many comments about this photograph. Comments from poets. A monk of a Benedictine monastery in Italy saw this image, and it said to me that this woman, for him, is the archetype of the Mediterranean woman. She's the custodian of the house, the custodian of the memory of the land where she has lived. She has seen all. We can imagine what she went through in her life. On top of that, also what she has gone through with the occupation, because the village has been harassed by the Israeli army all the time. When I approached the checkpoint, which is closing Aroma and is closing Al-Numan, the officer said to me, "Why do you go there? Why do you go to Mitzmorli? Mitzmorli is the new name of the village. The village has been erased, the memory. Al-Numan is only on the United Nations map. And if I go there because I have an assignment and I'm photographing the landscape on behalf of the UNESCO." He said to me, the soldier, "There is nothing to see in Al-Numan." This sentence struck me. First of all, because somebody telling to a photographer there is nothing to see doesn't make any sense. But the fact that you say there is nothing to see in a village where people live, where there are houses, where there is a history, where there is a memory, there is a time again. That's why I went there and asked the son of Fatima, "Can I photograph?" She, very proudly, she went inside the house, she dressed up, She came back. I took one photograph again of her, and her eyes, the way she looked down, literally, they will stay with me forever. And now I want you to ask me questions, otherwise I keep on talking until tomorrow.
Thank you.
So, questions? Take your own questions, Federico and Giovanni.
Just thank you, all of you. It's quite an amazing project. I had a question about the very last thing you said. When you said you just took one photograph, which you said previously, what are the reasons for when you just take one photograph?
When I take a photograph, I do not work with a digital camera. I work with a film. My camera is extremely slow, as 24 years old, has been with me forever. So I use a tripod. So it's quite a long process to set up that. And in the case of the man and the woman, I don't want to harass them. For me, it was just that moment, that instant, and not another instant. When I go to a place for the first time, I never take a camera with me. I can't. I needed to find, on an emotional level, on a psychological level, a correspondence with what is there. The camera comes later. Let's put it another way. If I were a musician, a poet, I will express that with the music and with the poetry. I'm a photographer, so I express that through an image. But the image doesn't come immediately. It's a matter of feeling, perception. It's something which is very hard to explain. Sometimes it's even difficult to take a photograph for what you have there. That's why I say I have to depart from that, because I know I'm leaving that thing. At the same time, I don't want to leave it. So it's that image in that moment, my connection with what exists, my affection. For me, it does not make sense to take 20 images of the same thing. It's that image, which is what I want. Please.
I would like to ask, how is this project emerged in mind in the UNESCO, and have you done a similar project in the other part in the world rather than Palestine? And the second thing is about you also. I was fascinating about the title of the book. In fact,
About
the
Title.
the title of the book.
about the remains, and the remains always is very important, but it doesn't show remains archaeology, neither anthropology, in fact, in the sense of the human, but you try to explain what is remain in your mind, but what is remains about in the whole area, what is the contracts it shows about. Do you mean about the remains is pre-48, or what is the remains you would like to your goal to be explained more precisely? You show only what is your in mind, but what is the target is for the remains. In fact.
The land that remains indicates what is left there. Of course, it's my mind. I'm the photographer that.
But
is
it's not
that.
it shows as archaeologist part.
It does. There are a few images
I mean,
about
no, but
archaeological
he
sites.
doesn't want to show the archaeology as he mentioned.
No.
His remain is something different.
No. What I want to say is that it's very tangible, because the book is also a record, can be used as a record. There are photographs of archaeological sites, monuments, houses, life, but there is also another part. These things are not there static. They're alive, they exist. That's the part which I try to convey. They are time, that's what I say. The land is the custodian and the repository of this. There is something immaterial when you go to see an archaeological site. It's not just a pile of stones. There is more in those stones. There is a memory in those stones. That's why I opened this conversation with the tomb and with the book, the same thing. The title, The Land That Remains, was a matter of conversation between me and Giovanni, because when we
After dinner. Remember?
yes, when we presented the exhibition in UNESCO, the original idea was to call this the land of Palestine. But at that time in 2010, we could not use the word Palestine. Think about that. For political reasons. So we came up with the land that remains, which actually is much more subtle and strong. What remains of this land? You show here an archaeological site, I think it's the photograph of
Jazim.
Monte Jazim. But if you look at this photograph, it's not only about the Byzantine or the Church of Mary Theotokos. It's the memory of that, especially in the flow. The book is a mood, is an elegy, I say. Otherwise, we talk about record, which becomes sterile.
Did you want to answer the question that was directed to you?
These are archaeological sites, or there are several.
If you go ahead.
Is the full book, sorry, the PDF.
Go up. That's the PDF of the book. Go up. Okay. This is the most important archaeological site in Jericho. It's the Umayyad Desert Palace, which goes back to the 7th century after Christ. 8th century. Now, there are 3 photographs of this archaeological site. When I took this image, I was thinking about the Chirico.
About?
The Chirico.
The Chirico.
I was not thinking about the archaeological site per se. So the image is a record of that part, but conveys something different also. It's an idea of a time. It's a time image. And if you look at the next one, which is another image of the entire complex, that poses the Umayyad, the desert palace, in the context of today. The image has almost a kind of abstract quality, because there is the contrast between the complex, the road, and that stripe. By the way, the stripe means do not park here. And the third image of the palace, now the quality on the wall is quite poor, but if you look at the book, that's the symbol of Jericho, which was found inside. So this is a record of an archaeological site. But if you look carefully at the 3 images, it gives you also something different than that. It gives a continuation of that today. The time of that. This is something which is 1,300 years old, as seen today. Does this answer your question?
Yeah,
That's
maybe
why
I have to.
the land that remains, that's what is there.
But the title also evokes Walid Khalid's book, doesn't it? All That Remains, which is about the disappeared villages.
Yeah.
And you know, if archaeology is anything, it's about the inhabitation of the landscape. We were looking at the ruins of inhabitation here. You know, that's what archaeology is about. It's not about the ruins, it's about the inhabitation of those ruins.
Thank you for that. It's
Yeah,
evocative.
actually, I think although he's a very slow photographer, as a slow food, you have slow photography. he's belonging to slow photography or extreme slow photography. Because sometimes he was coming back in the evening and I was asking him, how was your day? And he told me, it was very good, very good. I said, oh, wow, how many photos did you take? And he was telling me, one. I said, okay. And, okay, no, but by saying that,
It's already a lot for me.
yeah, one or two. He would say one or two, or sometimes two. You know, but never say more than that. But in spite of this fact, he probably have a portfolio of about 1,000 images, right?
No.
A bit less.
In total, it was taken 680.
Sorry. 680. Okay, let's say 700 images, and most of them, a good part of them, is actually belonging to more documentation images, like let's say this one taken per se without the one before and the one after. It can be an image of a leaflet on Ishan's palace. It's not, or very similar to the one you find in the tourist brochure made by the Minister of Tourism. It's not that different, because his initial assignment was, in effect, to document or to go through this land and document projects and sites, in terms of documenting. But of course, he was seeing a different layer, or various different layers, during his trips. And when we made the book, we need to also make tribute to Anne Sancho Azanza, who's a French, it is her French curator. She curated all your books, or almost all your books. She's the one who put the sequence together. She selected the image out of 700. She picked up 10%, or less,
when we worked it
or
together.
11% of these images. And of course, the choice was not only on the documentation of the image, or it is not an archaeological book, or it was a more personal and intimate journey, let's say, through the land. But this is one of the added value of this book, which is showing, as Rashid said very, very precisely in the beginning, iconic buildings or images or sites and this type of images. This is entitled
The image of the
Sima?
No. The church. The
Before.
next one.
Yeah.
This one.
This is
For example, that is an archaeological remains of the church of Al-Qadir in Taiwan.
St. George. Rather.
For me, it's more than that. Please.
Other questions?
Nice one. Well, so it's very interesting, you say the naked picture, because of course the last UN incident around photographs of Palestine was Jean Moore's, what became After the Last Sky, that Edward Said did with him. And they did it as a photographic exhibit that was supposed to, that was allowed to be shown at the UN, but they banned the captions. So it was okay to show the images, but you couldn't put the captions in for political reasons. So the politics was in the captions, and the title that it's not called Palestine. So I wonder, I don't know, I'm just trying to think about, that was a long time ago. We can say a lot more now than we could then. But there's an interesting relationship to the UN, to photographing Palestine, that I'd love to have you reflect on. Do you know about that incident before? The After the Last Sky. Well, wasn't it the photographic exhibit that was at the UN? Because they did the big 3 years big thing on Palestine that Edward Said and my dad and Ibrahim Abdullah and some others did, and they had the photographs, but they were not allowed to show the captions. So is this more?
For me, this is Palestine, the way I perceive.
Right.
The book, as you see now, UNESCO is not involved in the publication of the book. The book is a project by Giovanni and myself.
Maybe we have to say something about that. Initially, he asked me if UNESCO could be interested in publishing the book, and I cut this argument down in half a second, said no. No, because of various reasons, they will start to interfere in any single word, and then that. Although the book, I mean, is not a political attack or anything about Israel, something like that, but Israel occupation. But if you read through the sequence of the images, you perceive a certain message, right? And secondly, well, I have to say that when we made this book together, I was already out of UNESCO. I resigned about now 3 years or 4 years ago. So this project was done in an independent, let's say, way. But of course, we could not avoid to credit the beginning of the research was done within the framework of the UNESCO project. Because this is what happened actually.
The book does not show the occupation itself. As I said, for me it's not a political book. Of course, the photographs can be seen as political, because again, they're not private anymore, depends on which context you say. For example, when Giovanni said to me, you have also to include photographs of the Dead Sea. Okay. So there are 3 images of the Dead Sea in the book. The first image is this one. The second image is this one. Okay. There is this is an Israeli advertisement. There is a model.
Is that Ahava?
Ahava.
Oh, there's a big
And
boycott thing against that.
the image says there, have you taken your mineral bath today? The caption says Israeli billboard. It's a fact. You go south to Jericho, you take a photograph of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is by chance is vanishing. There is only 1/3 of the sea, the original one has gone. And then there is this nearby. Is this image political? Yes or no? Is an Israeli billboard, is in a place where it should not be, of course, we know that. But it's a fact. For me, is to convey the mood. The fact that the land has been taken away and something else has been imposed on top of that. That's what I want to convey. The third image is a natural reserve or Al-Fasca. So the 3 Al-Fasca, of which Israeli have taken the part with the water, and that is what is left. So the 3 images give you an idea of a profound sense of sadness, which is today the area of the Dead Sea, which is dying. The Dead Sea is vanishing. Now, there is also Ahava, which is, from my point of view, something coming out from Mars, basically dropped it down on that land. But I don't see this as political. I see it as a fact, which is there. Or, if you want to be in another image that I would like to show you, we were together
That days.
because we went to see Adadaria, the
We
village.
went to Dahria and
And
Samoa.
then we got almost lost. And we found that this can be discussed photographically, this image. It's quite a beautiful image. It's almost abstract, but shows you something profoundly tragic, which is a completely total destruction of the land by the Israeli. The caption says, Israeli fenced the roads. Why? We don't know. We discussed it. If the barrier is along the borderline of 1949, 48 to 49, or is inside the Palestine. 25% of the barrier now is inside the Palestine. but we could not be precise. In other words, we don't know if this is Israel or more likely is Palestine. That's why the caption says Israeli fence the road, which is a fact, because there is a military road and there will be a settlement. But from the UNESCO point of view, is the destruction of the landscape, the loss of the memory of the landscape. That's why I said before, is the aftermath, the consequences on the landscape. And that is an image which shows that. If somebody wants to tell me that image is political, I don't think so. It can be seen as political, but it's there. I cannot be 100% sure where is this barrier goes. The barrier goes for 750 kilometers, along the border. We know that. Probably this is Palestine. When we took this photograph,
We got lost that day, so we didn't.
we don't know where we were there. We were there by accident. A tank came out from this part. Soldiers came down and says, "What we're doing?" And I say, "Giovanni, you are in charge here because me, I'm just nobody." So we spoke with them and then they let us go. My fear was always that they could confiscate my Hasselblad. If I lose my Hasselblad, I'm lost.
One
Yes.
more question.
One
We have
question,
another
yes.
10 minutes, maybe.
Will there be volume 2 of this book?
And named Gaza, you mean?
No.
Volume 2.
Now,
Well, there was one thing to be said. Federico tried 3 times, if I'm not wrong, to get a multiple entry visa to enter Gaza. And it was always denied, so, because somebody said, it's not the whole thing, there's in Israel and Palestine. So this, because of the UNESCO assignment, we focus on the West Bank. We would focus on Gaza as well. We couldn't enter. There's one practical, logistical reason, which also political, but we couldn't go to Gaza. He couldn't go. I could go, but he couldn't go to Gaza. But yes, I mean, he has to answer. A second volume.
More than a second volume, I would like to go back there after 6 years. I'd
how
like to go
difficult
back there.
would it be without the UNESCO umbrella?
It would be almost impossible for me to travel. You needed to have the support, the official support of
An entity.
organization, an entity, institution like United Nations, because when you pass a checkpoint, and I've passed the dozens of checkpoints, without the United Nations permit, you don't go anywhere, especially in the Area C, along the valley of Jordan. And so it becomes difficult to go there.
You were stopped also several times, I remember. But every time you were in, more sensitive areas,
The most sensitive
the soldiers
area
were popping up like.
See, out of the blue.
Out of the blue,
You are
yeah.
photographing also me. I'm not invisible, but plus the way I photograph, I'm not a street photographer with a small camera that you go there and shooting. I'm just the opposite. So I stay there, I live there, I don't move, I stay hours waiting for the light, for the time, my tripod, and of course I become visible. So the soldiers come and they say, "What we're doing?" I'm watching the landscape. I'm watching the landscape. And then what you do? Well, maybe I take a photograph or not, which is true, because sometimes I don't take a photograph. And then they ask me my documents, my passport, and then of course they ask me the United Nations permit. Because I was not photographing the conflict itself, they thought that probably I was just not relevant for them. And so I could travel pretty free. Even if now and then they told me there is nothing to look at, there is nothing to see. And I said to them, and they go, okay. So far, you let me do whatever I want. When I arrived from Seattle, I arrived to Palestine. I never been in Palestine. It took me 1 week or two just to get my bearings. As I say to you, I don't go around with the camera at the beginning, and I'm really grateful to Giovanni because asking him, Giovanni, I need the time, and it was a miracle that Giovanni gave me all the time that I needed.
Yeah, normally UN projects don't have. We don't give time to anyone, you know. Assignment, 2 weeks and go.
2 weeks ago.
He stayed there for what, about 7 months, 8 months photography.
Totally, yes.
Yeah.
Without his insight, it would have been impossible, really, because he wanted to go beyond the simple record of taking.
No, because to be frank with you, Palestine is a pretty small area. A photographer, let's say a younger or more reporter photographer with a digital camera, would document the sites I was in need of documentation probably in a couple of weeks, even less, all from top down to Palestine. Going every day to 3-4 villages and taking hundreds of photos every hour and giving to me a CD or whatever, DVD with 10,000 photos to go through and skim and check and choose. But this was not not his, methodology.
One thing, that's the Church of Nativity. Church of Nativity is a sacred, by definition, is the Church of the Nativity. I went there many times. And finally I found the moment where there were no tourists, no people, and I could take this photograph. My way of photographing is pretty straightforward. As you can see, the image is frontal and takes you inside the focal point, which is the red curtain there at the end. The same I did with the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
It's before it.
Huh?
It's before.
See, at the beginning. Fine for me. That's Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, Giovanni tried to make me enter Al-Aqsa Mosque for quite a long time.
Yeah. I remember.
Otherwise, I could not enter
Several
Al-Aqsa
times.
Mosque.
Only because I know the doorman, the custodian.
That day, to photograph the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they brought me inside with my tripod, the camera, etc. And they told me, you have 10 minutes. What? 10 minutes? 10 minutes for me is 1 second. I needed to think about, because I'm photographing Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it will be again one time for a future time. Or just one chance to photograph Al-Aqsa Mosque. So again, instinctively, I placed my camera. My camera does not even have a meter. It's here. I don't use the meter. So I put the camera, and I started to freak out, literally, because I say, I cannot make a mistake here. If you look at the way this photograph is composed, it's the same angle of view, the other one, of the Church of the Nativity, which goes back to the original way of the photographers of archaeology were doing in the 19th century. But it's not easy, because you have to compose the image, and that may take time. In this case, I had only 10 minutes. And again, I took 2 photographs only.
I think there was another
Yeah,
question,
it's
right?
about, I don't know, it's about, I'm a bit uneasy about this lack of people, and this idea of people waiting, especially in the context that you talked about nostalgia. So those pictures for your mother, a lot of understanding them is because you know about them a lot. So my question is also in terms of the choice, do we, the choice of UNESCO or Giovanni, of your choice of somebody who's basically an outsider, sympathetic outsider, an outsider who comes, and of course, and this is, I think, connected, so comes with a specific view, which is fine, but and I haven't read, afterwards, kind of the positioning, the subject position. So because a lot of this is very, very political. So this idea that a land without a people for people without a land. So the fact that there are no people, except for these two images, it has been used. The land is sad and a victim, but despite that, there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of beauty. So there's a lot. I mean, I'm not saying this is definitely a story that is important, but there are other stories too. And I wonder why, for example, choice of an Italian photographer and not a Palestinian photographer, or a joint, to capture some of that nostalgia, some of the lived ways. Maybe that's not the point of the book, but how can that be situated in these different contexts, in these different discourses that resist this empty land kind of, and also the biblical, because a big part of what the British mandate was doing was making Palestine into something biblical and something ancient, something that was 2,000 years old, but not today. It was not 1930s, was not 1920s, was not the lived, the alive. So I'm just a bit.
I answer.
I think you have to answer what was this
No,
decision was the photographer decision, or
There are
But-
different questions, Signor. Let's just start from the last one. In the book, we don't talk about the Bible. For me, it was out of question. Again, what I have in mind is the memory of the land. It's like I want to rescue the memory from history. There is a dialogue, a continuum between the past and the present. In Italian, because the project was started by the UNESCO Ramallah office, so probably Giovanni took me instead of another photographer because he knew the way I photograph. But coming from Italy, for me, seeing Palestine has been a continuation, because in Italy there is this continuous back and forth between history, time and present. The present and the past, they are in continuous. Think about Venice, think about Florence, where I come from, think about Sicily. There is an affinity with the landscape. Of course, we don't have the occupation. But there are layers and layers and layers of history. So for me, in a sense, I found in Palestine something which was already inside me. That's why I connected with Palestine. Probably a Palestinian photographer would have seen it in a different way.
yeah, if I can comment on this point, I work with many Palestinian photographers for different other projects. It's not that they were banned to work with us, on the contrary. Actually, I had very few exceptions to have international consultants. Normally, the large majority were Palestinians for various reasons, obvious to understand. But for this specific thing, there were two main factors. Palestinian photographers, they would have much more difficult to travel comparing to an international photographer. And secondarily, knowing the work of many young and less young photographers of Palestine, I would need somebody to look at this place, and let's say, as he said, it was one of the first words he said today, from a distance, because Palestinians obviously were too involved in the day-to-day life and occupation, and therefore would may not bring the same type of result. We work with actually in the beginning. Remember, you worked with a Palestinian. He was in the first maybe 3 months or 2 or 3 months. He was with a Palestinian photographer from Ramallah who was taking him around. They were discussing and talking together. Of course, was a young photographer, Majdi Hadid, and so this idea was there. But okay, first of all, the book at the time was not even in our mind. It was a different type of assignment. The book came much later, as we said, it came later. But I wanted to have a sort of filter, in a way, between the eye or the lens and the photograph, that no Palestinian would produce because there were too much involved. And we supported Palestinian photography and Palestinian arts in different ways, also through museum projects and as Rashid mentioned before and other stuff. But this work was given to an international photographer also to, in front of an audience, which would be international and including the Israeli, who are part of the international community, would not be only perceived as sort of, from inside, but a more neutral, let's say, view.
I remember Majid,
But-
the Palestinian photographer, he traveled with me. At a certain point, he decided not to accompany me anymore. But there were some parts of Palestine that he could not understand. He could not even see. Either because it was too painful, or because he thought it was dangerous to go there. And I told him, don't worry, I have the pass to the United Nations, so I can go wherever I want, I'm lucky. He was almost afraid to face what was there. I don't know if this answers your question.
But also it seems sort of natural that no project can encompass everything. You're looking at a land and an occupation with a certain perspective, and all these perspectives are important. And actually, it's important, I think, to include the international community in the conversation of Palestine, because we have to have that dialogue. That's very important. And obviously, there's Palestinian artists who are doing a lot of different works, and there has to be the international community as well. And the question of the permit is extremely important because so many Palestinians cannot travel that land. But also to look at Palestine also through the lens of another photographer, not in the region, is extremely vital, I think, to the conversation of Palestine in relationship to the world. And none of it can, all artists have their different aesthetic. And in relation to the people, the thing of the absence of people, one of the things that the Israeli occupation tries to do is you don't see these people because, you're trying to make them invisible, I think that the sequence of the photos is also adding to that conversation. It's just one way to add to the conversation.
We have a class in this room in
Yes.
a few minutes. So I want to thank both of our speakers for the images and for what they had to say. Let me briefly remind you of some of the things that the center is doing. We have an event on Monday, October 10th with Basma Sharif, a master class with Hamid Dabashi that evening. And the following afternoon, 11 October, Basma will be screening some of her films. These are ads for it. With James Seamus, the renowned producer. The next event will be Decolonizing Architecture Art Residency, an evening with Sandy Hilal at Alessandro Petti, Saturday, October 22nd. That will not be here. That will be downtown, if I'm not mistaken. We're co-sponsoring that event. We have an event with the theater director and playwright, Amir Nizar Zabi, who will be, I think, talking about his work on Wednesday, November 2nd. In the evening, we have a film by Salim Abu Jabal as part of our Palestine Cuts film series. The event with Basma Sharif is also part of the Palestine Cuts film event. That'll be Thursday, November 10th. He'll be showing his film. It's called, if I'm not mistaken, Roshmiya. I don't know. So the title is given me. Then, as part of the series of which this talk was a part, we call it our Palestine Library, books on Palestine. There'll be a talk by Anahid Al-Haddan on a book she's just published on Palestinians in Syria. It's actually the only study of Palestinians in Syria. That's Monday, November 14th. Another event, the Yes Ahmad dance troupe will be here on November 29th using dance, actually not the dance troupe, sorry. The people from the dance theater will be here to talk about their work. They won't actually bring the troupe. Using dance to reclaim space in Palestine is the title of that event. And in January, also in our Palestine Library series, The Way to the Spring, Life and Death in Palestine, which is a book by Ben Ehrenreich. He'll be talking about his book. So we have 3 book events. We have 2 film events. We have an event about dance. and we have an event involving theater, so cultural events, all of them on Palestine. The Anhaid al-Haddan book is a very important work on Palestinians in Syria. It's not cultural, it's political. Thank you very, very much.